Hi there. Welcome to Storytime. I am Dr. Jennifer Bird. I am a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible because I don't like people being harmed by what is found in the Bible, whether people are using it accurately, as in the way people apply it is taking what's in the Bible fairly accurately and applying it to life. I don't like people being harmed by that. And I really don't like it when people are harmed by people misunderstanding what's in the Bible. So I am interested in raising awareness about what is actually going on in there and try very hard not to do any kind of telling people what to think or believe, but inviting you to think for yourself. So that's what I'm up to as a biblical scholar. And thanks so much to everyone who's here live joining us and those who are watching later. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you happen to enjoy something that you see on my channel, it helps me a lot. If you will like a video and subscribe, it helps others who are interested in the same things as you to find my work. And that's helpful for everybody. So just a little plug, little request there. Couple announcements before we jump into talking about Satan in the Newer Testament. Oh, I should have pulled up a church lady clip. Anyone here young enough to remember or old enough to remember church lady? Satan? Who could it be? Yeah, three quick announcements, and then we'll get right into the content. So I'd been asked to announce or to let folks know, for those of you who this might appeal to, there's BAHA-Con, B-A-H-A Con, coming up on April 1st. That stands for Blue Water Atheists, Humanists, and Agnostics. April 1st, online. Some lovely people are a part of that conference, online conference. And actually, one of the people in that, Kate Cohen, is going to be on my show. It's going to be here talking with me in April, a couple weeks after that, I guess, right the Thursday before Passover. Very excited about that. Also excited about a couple other conversations coming up soon that I'm hoping to line up to bring to this live conversation. So yeah, excited. Just letting you know, I'm excited. Some interesting developments. The other quick announcements. In the spring, I've started doing a book giveaway, giving away copies of Permission Granted. And I do that through Facebook because it's just easier for me to manage it in one place instead of trying to post it in a whole bunch of places. So I'll share that link in our community page when I do that, but just 20 copies this year. So if you're interested, or if you have a friend who you'd like to have, receive a copy, that's fine by me. All the information and how to handle that will be on Facebook in a week or two. And today is the third Thursday of the month, which means we're doing a live conversation for anyone who is supporting me financially through Patreon. So I will be sending out that link, a Zoom link, about an hour or so before the conversation, and we'll be using the discussion topics that were recommended by people tonight. We'll see how this goes. So wanted to let you know about that. And I think I will be starting a second live conversation much earlier in the day so that people in different time zones can catch it who are not able to be there at 8 p.m. Eastern US start time. So those are things coming up. I'm very excited about. And I just thought give a little plug or talk about the fact that I've been working on an open letter to the United States Congress. A scientist invited me to help him with that. And he brought on another religious studies guy who's done legislation. I guess, what's the language? Helping people think through what language to use for legislation with things around stem cell research and embryology, IVF, early stuff, biological development stuff. So I got to be a part of that, and we have created a letter, and we have over 90 scientists and biblical scholars, ethicists, theologians signed on. So I'm excited about that. I don't know where we'll get it published. I don't think New York Times is gonna take it, and neither do Washington Post. So we'll see. But I'm excited about that because it was, I guess it was an honor to be invited to be a part of that. It was interesting to do something different like that, trying to be a biblical scholar and engage the biblical content that was used in that Alabama court ruling. So interesting things afoot. Anyway, that brings us to today. Thank you, Kyle. That's very kind of you. Comments in the. I'm a little bit embarrassed to actually put that one up on the screen. He's just saying nice things for that. So those are the announcements. Pleased to be here to talk about Satan. So last week we talked about Hasatan, this character in the Hebrew Bible. For those of you who are new or not familiar with this, I like to refer to the two primary testaments of the Christian Bible as the Hebrew Bible and the Newer Testament, instead of calling them the Old Testament and New, because those labels are Christian labels, Old Testament and New Testament. There's a lot to this from my perspective, but the general gist is I like to be respectful of the fact that everyone who wrote all of the texts in the Christian Bible were identifying with Judaism at the time that they wrote them. So I don't like using Christian labels for it. All kinds of other anti-Judaic elements in those labels for the testaments, and it's a big thing. But that's what I choose to call them, is Hebrew Bible and Newer Testament. Okay, so last week we were talking about, in particular, we focused on Hasatan and Job, but we looked at other passages in the Hebrew Bible referring to that character. And it's just a character, it's a label for an angelic being of some sort in the Hebrew Bible, not terribly deeply well developed, is part of the point here. And if you were interested in some solid scholarship that's also very accessible, I think many of you have heard of or maybe even read some of Elaine Pagel. Let's see, without a glare. Elaine Pagel's work, The Origin of Satan, is one of her very well-known books, very important work. And she's very readable, right? So the second chapter is titled The Social History of Satan, or Satan, from the Hebrew Bible to the Gospels. And really, it's interesting too, because she does that from the Hebrew Bible to Gospels and not Hebrew Bible to Paul to the Gospels, but that's another conversation for another day, which is fine. I just, I find these things really interesting. But I highly recommend this book, partly because it's a very reasonable and well-informed, well-thought-through way of talking about some of the progression of thought, which is what we're always talking about. If you're going to talk about an idea in the Bible that shows up at all from new to, from the range, then you're going to need to be thinking about it and talking about it in light of the progression of thought. That is a piece that so many people leave out of their understanding of or conversation about ideas in the Bible. They aren't static. They are not, they're not, I was going to say monotone. There's not just a single representation of any particular idea. And in particular, we usually see intensification, especially when it is something like this, a character who, the definition, right, of diabolos, for instance, is one who throws something across your path, right? This character is helping to explain adversity or a challenge or something like that early on. And as Pagels explains, that within the Hebrew Bible tradition and then feeding into the Newer Testament, this generalization of us and them, and then, the insiders and outsiders becomes directed at people within their own group. And so you start to see people demonize others, whether they are also, considered Jews or not. So this intensification of, or the desire to, or the need for kind of an anthropomorphic kind of a way of talking about the embodiment of evil or temptation or something, right? That grows over time or tends to, and people will build on these basic, not, kind of just scattered ideas of someone who's an impeder or who's, kind of caused you to get to be doing the wrong things, like with David, and why was he led to do a census? That was arrogant or selfish or something, right? Basic little ideas that then become concretized, right? And massive, significant things build upon them. Well, I think that's important to know, that what you see in the book of Revelation is different than what you see in the book of Job, right? So what I wanted to do today was to walk. I don't know if this is going to be terribly boring or helpful. Thank you, Jackie. But I'm going to walk through all the passages in the Newer Testament that refer to Satan. So it's not Hasatan, because ha is the definite article in Hebrew. So that's a way for me to, that's the way I talk about it in the Hebrew Bible. So in the Newer Testament, it's just Satan. We don't tend to pronounce Greek with as many long vowel. I don't think we do many like long A's. I'm trying to think. How do we? Yeah, my thought. Yeah, it's more it's more of a this kind of an A, not a not a long A. Anyway, so Satan is the name in the Greek, the label in the Greek. So I'm going to walk through the passages with you, and I am happy to try to pay attention to what you might be saying. It'll be so much easier for me if you do give a quick little super chat. If you have a question, a pressing question, if it can wait or whatever, and you can just ask when I'm done, that's fine. I'm trying not to force you to have to do super chats to get my attention, but there's a lot in a sense to cover. So I'm going to just start covering it. I think that's all I needed to say as intro. Oh, no, one other thing. There's also another book, and I couldn't find it on my bookshelves today. So I may have loaned it to someone and not gotten it back. That happens sometimes. But this is Miguel de la Torre is a ethicist, I guess. He's an activist, theologian, ethicist. He teaches at Iliff Seminary in Colorado, and I love his. He has a book called "Reading the Bible from the Margins," which is just really helpful. I've used that quite a bit in hermeneutics classes. So this is a very different topic, and now he does much more social justice activism work with his work. But he also comes from a fairly conservative Baptist upbringing. So, a lot of scholars in religious studies will address the things that were really important to them when they were in more conservative circles, and they've kind of moved beyond that. So that makes sense to me that he also chose to do this. His is a more challenging read, just FYI. It's very rich, and he does more of a historical looking at some of the religious traditions and ideas, not even religious traditions, but ideas in what we tend to call the ancient Near East. So Northern Africa, Saudi Arabia, that kind of region, Persia, that kind of around the area, what ideas were out there that contributed to the development of an idea around this character who, So I highly recommend his book, and I'm sorry I can't just show it to you right now, but that's where we are. I don't have it, but you can check it out. And I'm going to go ahead and do some of this. Sorry about the formatting. When you do the format on my PowerPoint and then I upload it, Google Slides get a little jinky, but it's still going to work. So I'm going to do it this way in terms of I pulled in all the biblical passages, and then we'll look at chapter 22 and chapter 20 of Revelation together, like using the Bible Gateway, because it's just, anyway. So I've tried to figure out the best way to talk through this. So I think most of you know, but in case you don't, when we start talking about the Gospels, people often, when you're doing an academic conversation about the Gospels, we'll talk about the first three as the synoptic Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that's the canonical order. And synoptic, if you were to write that word out, it's SYNOPTIC. So SYN is with or together, right? And optic, so viewing them together. So there's a really interesting thing that kind of helps to cut down on the number of slides here to look at it, because the same idea often shows up in all three, or there'll be just a slight variation. So the earliest reference in the Gospels is to to this character called Satan, and then is interchangeably referred to as the devil. So that's kind of an interesting piece. I'm not going to make a whole lot about that today, because that's kind of like the quest for the historical Satan. Like, it's there's a lot going on to understand the development of those two different characters, and then why did they get mixed together? Well, because evil, blah, all big one pot, right? So I'm not going to dwell on the distinctions today, but I imagine many of you will notice some really interesting things, and then Beelzebul comes into the conversation a few times here as well. I'm just focusing on the character of Satan, just so you know, Satan. Okay, so the very first reference is in the testing of Jesus in the wilderness. So in Mark's gospel, so I'm doing Mark first, because we tend to think about Mark being written first. Lots of conversations about that. I don't want to dwell on the details, but that's why I'm looking at it first. It's the shortest of the three. There's all kinds of interesting things about the Gospel of Mark. So scholars tend to study it and talk about it as coming first. In Mark, opening like second scene, right? There's a pronouncement about John the Baptist, and then we've got this, and this is all there is in Mark's version of the testing of Jesus in the wilderness. In Matthew and Luke, there's this whole thing about John the Baptist and quoting from Isaiah and this yada yada. He's baptized, and then he's rushed out into the wilderness, and there's this exchange back and forth in Matthew and Luke between Jesus and this person testing him. In Mark, it's 2 verses. So maybe I should have shown that on the screen, the whole, that chapter, but this is it. Right after he's baptized, and the Spirit immediately, what's the word for immediately in Greek? I'm drawing a blank. But immediately the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, tested by Satan. And he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. End of story. That's it. That's all you get in Mark, which is just kind of fun. Sorry about that. Let me turn to my chapter 1, verse 12. Mark is also the easiest to translate. It's of the Gospels. It's usually the one you start on. Kaiuthus. I was like, why am I drawing a blank on them for immediately? Kaiuthu, and immediately. It shows up so many times in this first chapter of Mark. He's in a hurry. That's it. That's all you get. Now, if you're looking at the other 2 synoptics, Matthew in chapter 4 Matthew has back and forth 3 times. Matthew and Luke both do that. Right? Mark just has a reference to it happening, and that's it. And it is the character testing him is Satan. In Matthew, we have the same kind of thing, and it's when it gets to the 3rd time he's tested by this character, that's when he calls him Satan. In the first 2 exchanges, it's the devil testing him. And I talked about this a few weeks ago, and that's what led to just talking about the character of Satan in the Bible. That when you look at what's happening in this part of the gospel, this story, this character testing Jesus is essential. This is not, I don't think it should be thought of as an evil character who's out to get Jesus. And that is how I definitely thought about it for a very long time. Right, is the reader, the listener needs to know that Jesus is up for the task at hand. And so he's, it's this hero thing, right? He needs to show that he's up for it. And so this is essential. I think the clip I pulled from a couple weeks back was the devil's on our side sometimes, something like that, right? This is an important thing. He's not being an asshole. He's not being a jerk. Okay. So what's interesting, and this is, again, I don't want to make too much of any one thing, but in Luke, the character Satan doesn't show up in the testing series back and forth. Jesus just kind of rolls with it all 3 times. Yep. All right. They're quoting scripture back and forth, quoting scripture out of context back and forth to each other. And in Luke, Jesus has just got it. And in Matthew, he gets frustrated, right? By the 3rd time, just So I think that's a helpful way to think about this whole situation. He's being tested. He's famished. And people often are impatient when they're hungry, tired, angry. What is it? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I think he's probably all 3. Maybe not angry. Anyway, so you get the point. Part of what I'm getting at here is this the use of that, Satan and not just the devil, is just noteworthy. It's also not it's not a lot of content, and I'm just gonna kinda leave it at that. What you do with this is your right, so there's a thing. "Get away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." So you who's trying to tempt me, to test me, to cause me to stumble or whatever, right? Um, okay. So this is still the Gospel of Mark. And, I was gonna say, what's going on here? This is I have it on the full PowerPoint, but it's not showing up here, the chapter. So this is Mark, and Mark has the story about, people come, let's see, he's gone out of his mind, right? The scribes who came down from Jerusalem says he has Beelzebul, and by the rule of the demons, he casts out demons, right? So they're talking about what Jesus is up to. I see the question, and I'll come right back to that, after I finish this thought. So, this is going back and forth, he's by Beelzebul, he has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons, he casts out demons, and he called to them and spoke to them in parables. Jesus did in response. His response, "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered." So again, I don't want to make too much of any of these. But sure, we've got this overlapping category thing going on, right? There's demons, Beelzebul, they're all kind of mixed together here, Satan. None of them are clearly defined. And what I think is interesting, sorry about the formatting. What I think is interesting is Matthew and Luke also refer to this piece about how can Satan how can Satan cast out Satan? If he does, and if he's divided against himself, that house won't stand, right? Matthew and Luke both refer to that same thing, that second half, but they start differently. They start that story by referring to people bringing a man who is, as the story says, demon possessed, and he is blind and mute. In Luke, he is just mute. Not that being mute is just a thing, but my point is they do slightly different things with the same scenario, different character, different things going on. And people will make theological big deal out of those differences. I'm not interested in getting into those details right now, but I just wanted to show you that all 3 synoptics have this reference to how can Satan cast out Satan? Some form of it, right? And so Matthew and Luke just do something slightly different. So let's come to this question. Thank you, Wade Rogers, for the question or comment. Is it safe to say that Satan in Mark testing Jesus is like the Satan who tested Job, an intermediary who Yahweh sends to purposefully test people? Yes, I do think it is in keeping with that. Yes, I think that's a helpful way to solidify or kind of succinctly state what I was trying to get at. So thank you for the question. Yes. And there is a difference, however, in terms of the role of Hasatan in the book of Job. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why I care so much about Hasatan and Job. I just think he's gotten a really bad rap. And people really misunderstand. And because I teach an intro to the Hebrew Bible 4 times a year, I go through this a lot, right? It comes up every time. I really want to invite people to think more complexly about the story or the book of Job. And yes, the character of Hasatan is in chapters 1 and 2, and then drops out entirely for the rest of the book, which is 42 chapters, I think, 40, 42, something like that. So, yes, Hasatan's role in the book of Job is is meshed into this big picture thing that I think that I and many biblical scholars think is going on in the book of Job. So briefly, because I do want to keep moving, and you probably didn't want me to get into all that. You probably didn't intend all of that, this whole explanation, but I kind of can't help myself. What what the book of Job represents is a challenge to the general belief about the way the world works. And the general belief we tend to talk about in the biblical context is represented by the Deuteronomistic history. So that's a whole bunch of significant portion of the Hebrew Bible is informed by the worldview that's contained in the Deuteronomistic history. It starts with the book of Deuteronomy, as the name suggests, and it goes through the former prophets, the latter prophets. So those are former and latter. That's a Jewish framework for referring to those books, and that would be Joshua, Judges, First and Second Kings, First and Second Samuel. Flip this around, right? And then the latter prophets. That content says that if you worship Yahweh and do it correctly, Yahweh has your back. If you don't, God will allow something terrible to happen to you. And then that becomes flipped so that when bad things start happening, people start asking, what did you do wrong? And that's a belief that people still have. You can still hear people saying that today, right? So the book of Job is a way to challenge the belief that if you just keep your shit together, worship God correctly, life will be good. Because too many things in life challenge that. Too many decent people, good people have traumatic, tragic, awful things happen to them that you can't explain. It's not fair to say, this is your fault. You've done something wrong. And so the book of Job is trying to set up a framework for how to talk about that. How do what kind of a character do you set up at the beginning to bring this challenge to this ages old idea about the way the world works? So that's why it's important to me that people know that, because in that context, Job is uber righteous, kind of almost grossly so. And God's like, hey, isn't he great? And one of his advisors says, hey, maybe not, because, you've blessed him a lot. So maybe if you took that all away, he wouldn't be blessing you. But keep in mind, the point of the story is to challenge, right? That if you are righteous and good things will happen to you, because then you take everything away and Job is still righteous. And how do you explain that, right? So Job's Hasatan is different, very, very different than the purpose or the role of Satan in the testing stories in the Newer Testament. But they are both there to serve a purpose in the narrative, or to serve a purpose that we, the readers, need. And they're, in a sense, good guys. They're important. And, the devil's advocate is kind of what the role that Hasatan plays in the book of Job. He's not a jerk. He's making sure, right? In the storyline, he's making sure God's paying attention. And then in the larger framework, it's a way to set up. It's not the best, but it's what they chose to make sense of all of that. The reality, the way things, sorry, I meant to click that one off. Of how the world works as compared to the belief that many people had at that point in time. I hope that makes sense. I am looking at some quick questions here. Sorry, I'm trying not to so much. Someone pointed out that I do it a lot, and I used to be very good about not, so I'm trying really hard to be, but I don't see significant questions, so I'm going to keep going. So that's the reference to Satan here. We have a couple more in Mark, and then we'll move on to the other Gospels. So Mark chapter 4 has the parable of the sower, right? The sower sows the word, and this comes after telling another parable, and Jesus says to the people around, Do you not understand the parables? How are you going to understand all these other things? And then he tells this other parable to kind of chastise them for not understanding parables. The sower sows the word. These are the ones on the path where the word is sown. So sows these seeds all over the place, and some fall on the path. When they hear, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. And that is it. I didn't look up to see the reference in Matthew and Luke, but to see because I'm pretty sure the sower's parable reference shows up in them, but if they have them, they're not using the word, they're not using Satan. So I think it would have been devil or something like that. I'm just going to share this really quickly. Thank you so much, Archival Blob. And thank you. And it's nice to see you. Nice to have you here. Thanks for saying hi. So there you go. So this is a little bit more directive, right? This is a representation or a claim about a character that is a bit more intentional in terms of coming after you, right? So maybe I should have said that up front also. I think the character serves a purpose in the testing story. By the time we get to Revelation, this character, Satan, is pure evil, right? Is out to get the followers of Christ, awful. But there's all these kinds of morphing in between. And it's at times, when people are more angry or whatever, the reference to the using of this label, Satan, will, it varies and it gets more extreme than others. So that's what I'm trying to highlight for you here. Get behind me, Satan. So not everybody, many people are familiar with this phrase, right? Get behind me, Satan. Oops. So it does show up in Mark and Matthew, but not in Luke. In Luke, there's a different reference, and it's not calling Peter Satan. It's saying, Peter, Satan, and we'll come to it in a minute, but it's Satan has gotten permission, has been granted permission to mess with you all, to, sort you like chaff, or whatever it is. We'll look at it together. But so I want to highlight that while we're looking at these, because this is fascinating to me, right? Mark is saying, but turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." So Jesus is calling one of his own buddies Satan. Is this temper? Is this, are they able to see kind of this, you are, you're playing a role right now that is not helpful. Get behind, right? Are they able to see that? Well, sure they are, right? We might call a friend who's being a jerk. All right, whatever name you want to call him, right? Like, all right, cut out the nonsense or whatever. You're not actually demonizing your friend, but you're pointing out that they're being a jerk, right? So get behind me, Satan, for you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Almost entirely the same, but in Matthew, it's slightly different, right? Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things. And so that is really the role of Satan in most of the two testaments, not necessarily the book of Revelation and not in some of the others, Paul's writings, but right. You're a hindrance. You're not tracking. And it is, I don't think that if Jesus said this, right? Let's posit there's a guy named Jesus from Nazareth or whatever, and in the general Galilee area, and he had a buddy who was misunderstanding his purpose. If he said it, I could believe he'd say it, but he also didn't hate him. He also didn't think of Peter as evil, right? He's one of the three, Peter, James, and John, like one of the inner three. So it's fascinating to me. I guess I'm pointing that out because I think about the way people will reference this. People will just drop this line, "Get behind me, Satan," and do you know what I mean? Like, people today quote this, and somewhat the same kind of a way, but taken out of context, and it's I don't know. It feels different to me in context and not as dramatically demonizing in context, it seems to me. But that's just okay. That's yours to deal with. So that's it. There aren't any unique references in Matthew that don't show up in Mark or Luke. Right. And so now we're moving on to Luke. And there are a couple that are unique to Luke. This one, the reference to Jesus has sent out the disciples and the apostles, I guess, the disciples, 72 of them, 2 by 2. And that's where he gives the reference to, if they don't welcome you, brush the dust off your feet, before you, as you leave the town, reference to Sodom and inhospitality there in right before this passage. So the 72 return with joy, saying, Lord, in your name, even the demons submit to us. And he said to them, I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. Indeed, I have given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice at this, that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. A kind of fun little chiding by Jesus, So what's his point here? I've seen even the biggest, the greatest of them, perhaps, fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. Yes, you have these authority. Yes, they're talking about demon possession, by the way, people. Jesus and his disciples are talking about demon possession. Do we need to be clear about that? Do we need to take a moment to talk about that? Anyway, right? Something that many people today would like to question or challenge. And this is going to sound really random, but I had a student who was from, I think he was from Nigeria. I can't remember for sure, which it's a huge continent, keeping them all straight, African country he was from. But he was a student at Greensboro College, and he came up to me after class because we'd read through the story about the way the person was thrashing and they couldn't they couldn't keep chains on him and couldn't keep him bound. And he came up to me after we talked about how do we make sense of this, He said, I've actually seen this happen, this take place. People that are, there is a spirit of something over them that makes them unbelievably strong and unable to be bound. And then someone casts something out of them and they are in their right mind again. What is my point in sharing that story? I think there is a lot that goes on in this world that we can't always make sense of. Probably going to lose, like the viewership's probably going to drop in half. This woman is crazy. There's just a lot that goes on in this world. I'm not interested in making definitive pronouncements about what's, about a lot of these things, because I've heard stories and I've seen things and whatever. But I don't think that this is, sure, we've got a reference to, this character Satan. We also have a reference to Jesus and his disciples talking about demon possession and casting demons out of people. So, if you're going to get worked up over this character Satan, I think you need to take all of what's going on here to heart as well, right? Whether or not you believe in demons or not, I don't have a, well, I do have a position on that, but all right, let's just keep moving. Probably starting to not sound so it makes sense right now. Next passage in Luke, this is in chapter 13, verse 16. So this a reference, and ought not this woman, she was this the woman, the woman who was bleeding for 18 years, or she was bent over? I can't remember, because Luke has them both. Anyway, and ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day? Of course, they're testing about why he would heal on the Sabbath, but interesting claim, way to use the reference to the character Satan, right? That a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound. So this is a way to, what they're talking about is physical challenge, a physical deformity isn't the word I want to use, a physical difference that made getting around challenging. If this is the woman, the bent over woman, I think it is, who came into the temple and he straightened her. So a deformity in her spine or something that made living very uncomfortable, very painful. So, is he saying that there's a character, there's a being that is actually binding her, or is this a reference to a way of talking about this unfortunate reality, right? And she is she was in pain, and now I'm set free from that. Like, you really going to get on me for that? It's up to you how I respect that you get to do what you want. Meant to. So here's the difference. So remember we looked at Mark and Matthew both have "Get behind me, Satan." In Luke, it's just a whole different thing. And this one makes it a little more clear back to this other thing about being more like the Satan is one testing. So Luke chapter 22, 31 to 34. Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded, that's one translation, another suggests gotten permission to sift all of you like wheat, which is, sorry for the language, but to fuck with you, right? Like he's gotten permission to really mess with you. Again, that's the Job kind of a role of Satan, right? That it's not just for no reason. The Satan character isn't just messing with people just to be an asshole. He's messing with people for a particular reason. And, whatever. Okay. So Satan has demanded or gotten permission to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. So he's not calling him Satan here. He's saying very different things. Interesting. Saying general part of the story, very different use of the whole thing going on. And Peter says to him, Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And Jesus says, I tell you, the cock's gonna crow. What is it? Sorry, I was trying to paraphrase it, and then I got it confused. The cock will not crow this day until you have denied me 3 times. Deny 3 times that you know me. So, again, how much are we going to put on what he's saying here in terms of an embodiment or, right, an embodied being or spirit? Does he actually think that there's a Satan? I don't know. I don't know for sure. Okay, so that was chapter 22. And I put those together, because I wanted to put it closer to the Matthew and Mark. So earlier in that same chapter, the festival of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, but they were afraid of the people. All very interesting. We're coming up on Palm Sunday, aren't we? For those who observe. Yeah. Then Satan entered into Judas called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers of the temple police about how he might betray him to them. They were greatly pleased and agreed to give him money. So he consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray him to them when no crowd was present. So, the way that's stated sounds to me very much like we've progressed a bit in terms of how the character Satan is being understood or being referenced here. And sure, people to this day use this language, right? That, not just that Satan or the devil's going to tempt you, but this idea of evil spirits or demon, taking over or entering you. Excuse me. There you have it, right? And then did I put John next to it? I did. Okay, so this is the version of that whole thing in Luke. So we're, chapter 22 of Luke, he's in Jerusalem. It's all, right? We're very end, last week of his life. So obviously, because this is the night before. And so this comment that Satan entered Judas and led him off. And there's a whole separate conversation to have about the role of Judas and how Judas has been interpreted over the century, even just in the last, how he's interpreted in the movies of the last 80 years is really kind of fun to talk about. And one, I think, well, anyway, so there are different ideas about what this guy, Judas, was actually up to. I'm not going to get into that. But the passage in John where the same idea comes up is in chapter 13. And this is where Jesus has this final meal with his disciples. It's a very different meal in John. I don't know how many of you know that. I did a video about that, or maybe I should do it if I haven't, that in the synoptic gospels, Jesus eats the Passover meal with his disciples and is arrested that night, and he's executed, hung up to suffocate by crucifixion the next day, right? In John's gospel, the last meal he eats is the night before Passover, so that Jesus is arrested that night and he is tried in a ridiculous trial, and he is being executed at the time that the people would be slaughtering lambs for the Passover meal. John is doing a theological thing. John has a very different take on Jesus than the other three, so forth and so on. So there's that. But anyway, let's come back to the point, which is just looking at the way Satan is being used in these passages. And I'm going to, sorry, I forgot I would do that. So after saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared very truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, other conversation has been had multiple times about this particular character, was reclining close to his heart. That's a bad translation. The one whom Jesus loved was spooning with him, okay? Simon Peter therefore motioned to him, the one Jesus loved, to ask Jesus, who's he talking about? So while reclining in Jesus's lap, okay, he asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it's the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, do quickly what you are going to do. Now, no one knew why he had said this to him. So it's interesting, right? The narrative suggests everybody wants to know. The beloved, the one whom Jesus loved, asks him, who are you talking about? And Jesus kind of does the little whisper between them thing, oh, someone I'm going to give the piece of bread to. And then apparently the beloved forgets to tell everybody how to interpret that gesture. I'm not trying to make a big deal of these things. I just think it's kind of fun. Some thought, so no one knew what was going on here. This claim about Satan entering Judas really terrifies me because of the way this, in the Gospel of John, this becomes a piece of the demonization of Jews other than Jesus and his own followers. So the Gospel of John is terribly unsettling to me in terms of its anti-Judaic content, and this is a piece of that. And Mel Gibson's Passion does a really terrifyingly good job of depicting what makes me upset about this whole thing. So anyway, so I don't know, is Satan actually entering people? Is that a thing? Does that really happen? What do people mean when they say that? What did they mean at the time? People today, some people do believe it's literally happening. I get that, right? Is it just a way of saying, I made a decision and I'm going to go do this thing, right? And it's perceived as being anti the movement, so it's being demonized. I don't know. Like, I think there's there are a variety of ways of understanding even what it is they're trying to say here when they make that reference. Okay, am I missing any important questions? I can take a moment to respond, and I can maybe look back to see if there are any important questions. Maybe not. I don't think I missed anything that was super chatted. Okay, so okay. So the Book of Acts, this is yet another topic that I feel very strongly about because of the anti-Judaic nature of the Book of Acts. And because so many people who grow up in a church are taught to use it as historical, so many people think of it, because it's the only book in the Newer Testament that gives us a narrative of what happened right after Jesus is executed. It makes sense to me why people kind of not cling to it, but trust it. I understand why people trust it, but we shouldn't. It seems to me we shouldn't be trusting it. And I did actually, my very first conversation actually with Derek Lambert on Myth Vision almost 4 years ago was on this topic. I had just worked through a 6-week, 1 hour-ish each week lesson on the anti-Judaism in the book of Acts for the Episcopalian cathedral that I was connected with. I taught for them quite a bit while I was in Portland. And we just went into lockdown and because of the pandemic, and so I did this 6-week series, and I get very emotional when I start talking about the anti-Judaic nature of some of the content in the Newer Testament because so many people are not aware. Let me just real quickly, I'm gonna say that again. It's important to me for people to be aware of the anti-Judaic nature of any of the content in the Newer Testament that is that. It's important to me to point out the anti-Judaic nature of some of the content in the Newer Testament. And the book of Acts, the Gospel of John, the book of Hebrews, those are the top 3 horrific books with that kind of content. And that is part of why so many Christians aren't even aware that their ideas are anti-Judaic, because they are trusting the book of Acts as if it is literal history, as if the things said in it are true, and it is scary to me. I'm going to go see what this is. I appreciate the super chat, JC. How do Christians claim monotheism given Satan's power? Can we come back to that? Because I want to keep going through, but I think it's a great question. Actually, let's see if we can do this very quickly. How do Christians claim monotheism given Satan's power? It's a great question. I think you could ask the same question about how do Christians actually make the Trinity work? Right? It's just something I believed for a very long time because it's a belief. It's a tenet in the creed that I'd say one of every week growing up. How do Christians claim monotheism given Satan's power? I don't think you can speak for all Christians on anything. So I'll just say that first. I also think there's an interesting way of compartmentalizing and saying that angels and demons and that kind of stuff is spiritual. They are spiritual beings, but they are not God. And so this is my understanding, right? That there is a delineation, even though in a sense they're all living in the same space, right? The spiritual realm, right? Whatever, wherever that is. And I'm doing this above my head because that's kind of where I think about it. So there's a difference between a God in a Christian context and all the angels and demons. That's I guess the short answer to that question. And then that raises all these other questions, right? Which I think you're probably aware of and maybe even thinking of, right? That how is it possible that Satan could have any control over humans? Doesn't that make him kind of a semi-god? How is it possible that the fact that there's evil in the world means that God created it? If God created everything, God created Satan, God created the devil, like all those things that kind of go along with that, I think are all, yeah, people find a way. Ultimately, people find a way. And that's my sense of how people do it. There may be other ideas even being chatted about in terms of how some Christians do make sense of Satan as being real in some way, even though people believe in only one God. Or yeah. And that's also a thing. Gosh, you guys ask really good questions that make me want to like go off on all these tangents. We do, just to clarify, right? The Hebrew Bible talks about what we would refer to as a henotheism, as in the Israelites were to worship this one God, but they still believed other gods existed. I mean, come on, everybody knows that. And so, but we're only going to worship this one because it's the right one, and then that kind of thing grows, and then that develops over multiple centuries into this belief that there is only one God. And I think that earlier, concept of pantheons and things like that helps to contribute to this belief for Christians and a way of managing for Christians, that the belief that God exists, but there's only one God, and there are these other angelic beings and demonic beings that are kind of substratas in the spiritual world. Does that make sense? Great question. I appreciate it, JC. And it's nice to see Kip here. Thank you for showing up. That's lovely. Yeah, the book of it, there was, because your comment, let me just make sure I understood your comment, because I appreciate that as well, Kip. Thank you, Jen, for providing a little clarity. Yeah, yep. Those three, Hebrews, Acts, and the Gospel of John. Terribly. And that's why when I brought on Adele Reinhardt, she was the second person I got to interview. She's done a lot of work with the Gospel of John. She is a Jewish woman who is a New Testament scholar, and she's dealt with a lot of the the anti-Judaic nature of the Gospel of John. Okay, so the book of Acts, I don't want to spend, dwell on this. Oh my goodness, I did not even see the time. Sorry, folks. We don't need to draw this out too much longer. We have this reference in Acts chapter 5, where Ananias and his woman Sapphira, because that would be woman in the Greek. I don't have my signs ready. I don't need to hold the signs up. I guess I have to do, with the consent of his woman. So I sold a piece of property. With his woman's knowledge, he kept back some of the proceeds and bought only a part and laid it at the apostles' feet. Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back part of the proceeds of the land? So again, this is right. I don't think we should be capitalizing Satan. There's all kinds of things going on here that I think when you read it in context, you can see it a little bit less intensely than the way that I grew up thinking about this character, Satan, and the way a lot of people talk about this character. But regardless, you get to read it however you want. This reference in the end of the third time that Paul tells his story in the book of Acts, it's slightly different each time. Not a big deal. Doesn't need to be a big deal, because that's storytelling. But a reference in his little speech, right? I will rescue. This is what God has said. When Jesus meets him on the road, the third time, different things happen. And why are you persecuting me? It hurts you to kick against the goads. And Paul says, "Who are you, sir?" It should say "sir" there, not Lord, because he doesn't yet know that Jesus is Lord. Anyway, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up, stand on your feet. I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you to serve and testify to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you. Very interesting language about visions, right? I will rescue you from your people, which is just, please take note, and from the Gentiles, to whom I'm sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. It's a pretty strong claim. We've got some serious, demonizing of this character, right, being placed directly contrary to God, whereas in Job, we have Satan is one of God's advisors. Right? Let's not lose sight of that. This is a progression of thought. All right. I just need to say I don't like Paul. And if you're offended by that, that's okay. I just don't like Paul. And so I get uncomfortable having to deal with Paul and with apocalyptic literature and all kinds of stuff that people have misunderstood and made big things of. Anyway. So 1 Corinthians 5, this is in the couple chapters where he's talking about sexual interactions and he's judging some for their choices. Let's just be clear about that. And so they've talking about this whatever scenario and so Paul is he's not in Corinth, he's in a different place. He's heard about this kerfuffle and he's sending back some advice to the people in Corinth about how to handle these matters now that formerly Gentiles of various religious traditions, and now they're all a part of this thing called the ecclesia of Christ or of God. Things are different here than this other thing you used to do. So Paul's telling them how to handle this guy who was this the one who was sleeping with his stepmother? And it's not clear if his father is dead yet or not. Anyway, for I, Paul, though absent in body, am present in spirit, and as if present, I have already pronounced judgment in the name of the Lord Jesus on the man who has done such a thing. I think this is actually a reference to a guy who had sex with sex workers, but regardless. When you are assembled and my spirit is present with the power of our Lord Jesus, can we just pause to reflect on that language? This is just really, it's really arrogant, narcissist. I don't know. What do you want to call that? When you're assembled and I am there, my spirit is present with you, with the power of our Lord Jesus, you are to hand the man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that the spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. I think this is supposed to be a welcome piece of advice, and it just turns my stomach every time. Turn him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. So Paul's message about Jesus as saving people is spiritually focused. It is not doing what Jesus was up to. It is a very different message. And then 2 chapters later, same kind of, we're still talking about sex, and a man who claims to be abstinent is giving people sex advice. It's just fascinating, isn't it? But chapter 7, he starts with this idea that it's better for a man not to touch a woman, meaning even if you're married, maybe you should be abstaining from sex. It makes you holier, right, than if you were having sex. That's the question, one that cracks me up, that, like, I can see why someone would want some clarification on that. Are we really? Is it really? Are we really more holy if we abstain? Blah, blah, blah. His comments, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a set time, to devote yourselves to prayer, and then to come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay, so this external force of, temptation, however you want to look at that. And then 2 Corinthians is a mishmash of letters. It's not chronological, and there's he's kind of tears him a new one in chapters 9 through 13 or 10 through 12. I don't know. There's a section in there. But the letter starts with his apology that he followed up with after tearing him a new one. So it's a confusing letter to study. And I did a seminar on it in seminary, and that was the last time I spent any time in that book. That was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Okay. So anyway, and then it also, anyway. So here's more letters, more content from Paul giving advice. I urge you, there's interesting language here, right? So let's read this whole thing. But if anyone has caused grief, he has caused it not to me, but to some extent, not to exaggerate it, to all of you. So if someone has caused him grief, is what he's saying, and then now he's kind of clarifying all this. This punishment by the majority is enough for such a person. I can't. Language like this just undoes me. So now instead, you should forgive and console him, so that he may not be overwhelmed by even worse grief. So I urge you to reaffirm your love for him. I wrote for this reason, to test you and to know whether you are obedient in everything. Come on. It just makes me cringe, right? Ugh, I wrote to test you. Anyone else having a strong reaction to that? What's a good word for that? It's not condescension. It's presumptuous. I don't know. Anyway, to test you and to know whether you are obedient in everything. Anyone whom you forgive, I also forgive. In fact, what I have forgiven, if I have forgiven anything, has been for your sake in the presence of Christ. And we do this so that we may not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. Again, same kind of concept. He's not a great character. We're not happy about him being around, and so later on, next chapter. Oh no, into the letter, near the end. And what I do, I will also continue to do in order to deny an opportunity to those who want an opportunity to be recognized as our equals in what they boast about. This is where he's referring to these super apostles, as he calls them, who have come along behind him and are changing the story or trying to get people to not agree with Paul's version of things. Doesn't matter. For such boasters are false prophets, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder. Even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is not strange if his ministers also disguise themselves as ministers of righteousness. Their end will match their deeds. So he's referring, just so we're clear, to other followers. Is he referring to other followers of Christ, or is he just referring to other Jews? Regardless, he is referring to other people that he is distinguishing himself from, right? Differentiating himself from, and he's calling them ministers of Satan. Like this is not great, right? This is really not pleasant language to me, and it's very unsettling to see it in Paul's writings in this kind of a way. His revenge, his vengefulness is really unsettling to me. So here we go. It's another one similar. I'm not going to read that one. I forgot to put this in bold, but First Thessalonians, he's talking about how he wanted to see the people in Thessaloniki, which is over in Greece today, and so we longed with great eagerness to see you face to face, for we wanted to come to you. Certainly Paul, wanted to again and again, but Satan blocked our way, right? Again, is this what they are actually making of this is, we don't really know. And then what is it about this? The language about the return of Christ, the second coming of Christ, all of that kinds of language, for some reason, as I was preparing for this today, I was trying to figure out what is that. I feel something in my gut, and I feel like there's something in it makes me somewhat like not queasy, but I feel a little bit weak. It makes me very uncomfortable to even try to talk about these things. This lawless one and the man of lawlessness, but we're going to read it anyway. But to be clear, the letter of Second Thessalonians needed to be written because in First Thessalonians, when we tend to assume that Paul and his buddies did write First Thessalonians, their language about when Christ would return wasn't super clear, but it also made it seem like it was so soon. It was going to happen like a thief in the night. You aren't going to know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen soon. And it appears that language was leading to some people being kind of lazy, and because it's happening any day now. And so those who are still working are having to also carry them. And this is problematic. This would be problematic in any cult, in any community, right? So Second Thessalonians needed to be written to explain that, well, there's some things that are going to happen before it happens. So you'll have an indication. So get back to work. Anyway. And this is part of that. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, but only until the one who now restrains it is removed. Really interesting language about restraining the man of lawlessness and all these elements of evil or things out to get people. Just interesting to point out. Then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will destroy with the breath of his mouth, or will consume with the breath of his mouth. He must have had a lot of onions for lunch. Annihilating him by the manifestation of his coming, right? This is all very interesting, and it's very like apocalyptic tangent, right? Like it's similar to apocalyptic language, even though it's not fully blown out, right? Fully, teased out. The coming of the lawless one is apparent in the working of Satan, who uses all power, signs, lying wonders, and every kind of wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion. Can we just pause on that for a minute? God sends people delusions? Please. Leading them to believe what is false. I mean, that's just cruel, right? That's called punching down, isn't it? So that all who have not believed the truth but took pleasure in unrighteousness will be condemned. Okay, I think we just have a couple more here. Let's see, 2 in 1 Timothy. Yep. Okay. So 1 Timothy 1, this charge I commit to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies made earlier about you, so that by following them you may fight the good fight. Has anyone used that phrase? Ever heard that phrase used? Having faith and a good conscience. By rejecting conscience, certain persons have suffered shipwreck in the faith. Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have turned over to Satan, so that they may be taught not to blaspheme. I just find this language so funny. Hand him over to the bouncer. Like, I don't know, like, what I've handed him over. Just take him out of my presence and go beat the crap out of him. I don't know. Like, what does he mean by that? I've turned these two over to Satan so that they may be taught not to blaspheme. I just worked through the series, oh shoot, what's it called? The Sopranos. I finally watched The Sopranos, and I'm just thinking, like, he has hitmen, like, hand him over, go get rid of him. I don't want to know about it. Just do it. 1 Timothy 5, so that end of the letter, near the very end of the letter, all kinds of language about real widows, which is interesting. Real widows are those who are 60 or older, and the church, the community, is willing to support them. So this is why it's a problem. Widows, orphans, and the poor, that grouping, are referenced, I should probably go find out how many times in the Bible, both Testaments, because widows, orphans, and the poor, what do they have in common? Right? Economic duress, right? So anyway, women over 60 apparently are not able to work to support themselves. So we'll definitely take care of them, but not, the young ones don't really count as real widows. So I would have younger widows marry, bear children, and manage their households so as to give the adversary no occasion to revile us. That's an interesting language also, because that's one of the definitions or the ways that people handle the Satan in the Hebrew Bible as adversary. For some have already turned away to follow Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her assist them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it can assist those who are real widows. All kinds of other things going on here in terms of the letter of 1 Timothy. Timothy lived in Ephesus and went back and forth between Ephesus and Crete, raises all kinds of very interesting things. This is taken out of context. There's really interesting things that these women were doing and that they're being judged for, but I think that I think it's one of those things that is misunderstood. Talking about being gossipy and they want to tell stories and all these things. Like, well, actually, you know what? We all like a good story, and somebody comes through town with a new thing to say, and these wealthy women want to go hear about it. Like, I'm like, let's give them some intellectual curiosity, not just gossipy labels. How about that? Right? Anyway, I have strong feelings about some of these things. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 7 references to Satan in the book of Revelation, and 2 of them are in the messages to the churches. Excuse me, not 2 of them, 2 chapters. So 4 references are in the messages to the churches, and then you have chapter 12, the reference to the great dragon, and that is, as I learned on Sunday, a reference to Isaiah 27, the Leviathan, the great dragon, the devil. Those things are kind of being talked about at the same. I think I actually have it. Let's see what's happening here. What? Yeah. Isaiah 27. On that day, the Lord, with his cruel and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will kill the dragon that is in the sea. Is Leviathan a dragon? A serpent? What is it? Are we supposed to know that those two are being used interchangeably and we're all okay with that? I don't know. But that's the reference in Revelation 12 is that. So what we have going on is a reference back to Isaiah. So let's see. Oh, sorry about that. What am I doing? We're doing, let's just do that. And then I'll change the, so I want to look at Revelation chapter 2 and 3 with you. And sorry about these. So Ephesus doesn't have any reference to Satan, but Smyrna and Pergamum do. Let me come back over and see how we're doing here. Okay. So, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna. So, right. So the beginning of this letter, there are seven different churches that are talked about. It isn't that there are only 7 churches in Asia, which is in the westernmost part of Asia Minor. It's just that those are big ones. They're well respected, yada, 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 right? And John himself probably came from one of those churches or from that area. And so he has been arrested because of the name, right? For associating with the name of Christ. And he's considered a political prisoner. I think that's a really important thing for people to hear. And I don't know if you all know that already, or maybe it's just helpful to be reminded of it. But the book of Revelation is a political issue. People who follow Christ are being arrested, sometimes tortured, definitely persecuted, and sometimes executed because of their association with the name of Christ. And we have a letter from Pliny, a governor in the northern parts of Asia Minor, Bithynia and Pontus. He'd been sent by the emperor to this region to handle these uprisings and to handle the trials of the Christians. And he's like, I'm not quite sure how to handle these Christians is it okay? Do I not punish them if they recant? Do I punish them for having ever associated with this name? And it's great. It's a great letter. You should go read it if you haven't ever. Freely available on the internet. From Pliny to Trajan in the year 112 or 113 Common Era. So we have references to the same parts of the world. We have we know these things are going on. The book of Revelation is about depicting the demise of the Roman Empire because of the suffering of the followers of Christ that is happening within the Roman Empire. And the issue there is not that they worshiped Jesus, but that their worship of only Jesus and of not participating in the emperor cult was getting them in trouble politically. Okay? Love to talk about that part of stuff to try to clarify what's going on here. And it's kind of fun and it's complicated. And anyway, maybe I'll do a course on that at some point. So there's a message to each of the 7 churches in the region of Asia. So the message to Smyrna and to the angel, and there's also a reference to 7 lampstands, and they explain all the symbolism. So there's an angel assigned to each of these 7 churches. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna, write this. These are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews, but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. It is horrific to me to have this association between Jews and Satan, or Satan, as people pronounce it, right? This is coming out of several decades of essentially infighting over the true trajectory of the Jewish promises and covenant and all of that. So it's really fascinating to me. I'm trying to stay focused on Satan here, but it's okay. But do not fear what you're about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested. Notice how literal this part is. They are actually being thrown into prison. And for 10 days you will have affliction, be tortured for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Don't worry if they kill you for resisting. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. I just know way too many people who have been traumatized by these passages. And it makes me quite sad. Pergamum is one of my favorite places to visit in terms of ancient sites. And it's because of this. To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword, which is described elsewhere as coming out of his mouth, by the way, which makes me kind of want to gag every time I think about that. I know where you are living, where Satan's throne is. Yet you were holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you where Satan lives. This is just saying it, right? The emperors, the temple to the emperors is Satan's throne, right? The emperor, the Satan, the Satan is being, the emperor is being talked about as Satan, the devil, whatever, because that's the one at the head of this empire, and the followers of Christ are not they're not paying tribute to the emperors like they're supposed to, because they only have Jesus as Lord. So they're not going to pay tribute to Caesar as Lord. And that's why, sorry for the random tangent, but that's why I think it's helpful to read the book of Revelation, alongside the book of 1 Peter, because they are addressing the same issue. And they have very different advice on the very same issue. 1 Peter, written by someone imprisoned in Rome. So he's imprisoned for the same reason that the writer of the book of Revelation is imprisoned, right? But they just have different settings. And one is in the heart of the capital of the empire, and one is far removed from the capital of the empire, right? John is on the island of Patmos, which is just off the coast of modern-day Turkey or ancient Asia Minor. The guy writing the letter of 1 Peter is in prison in Rome, arrested for the same reason. And his advice, sitting there in the heart of the matter, right? The heart of the military complex and all of that, he says, just do what you need to do to survive, right? It's awful. It's going to be awful. There's a lot of suffering that's about to happen, but just do what you need. So do what you need to do to survive. Same exact issue. But John is basically saying they're going to get theirs. They're going down, right? So I know where you're living, where Satan's throne is. This is the emperor, the temple to Trajan and the other emperors. It's just magnificent in the town of Pergamum. It's just magnificent. And, 150 years ago, biblical scholars, when they were starting to discover or whatever the site of Pergamum, found the temple, the altar to Zeus, and said, this is Satan's throne, because it's a different god. Not. So they've labeled it. I don't know if it's still labeled this way. I was told, I haven't seen it. I was told by people who've apparently seen it that there's a temple to Zeus in a museum in Berlin labeled Throne of Satan from Revelation chapter 2. It's not true, but there you have it. What are you going to do? But that shows you why and how so many people misunderstand the point of the book of Revelation, that they weren't even looking for this to be about politics, right? And so I've taken people on a trip to see Pergamum, and I keep telling the tour guide, I'm like, that temple to Zeus, that altar to Zeus down there, that's not the Throne of Satan. The Throne of Satan's right here in the middle of the heart of the city of Pergamum. Anyway, I hope some of that made sense. So yada, yada, yada. I've got these things against you. You get the idea. We've got this Satan being talked about here. Let's keep moving. And then it's chapter 3, and I can't remember which verse, so we'll look that up real quick. Find, there we go. So the message to Philadelphia, and the angel of the church of Philadelphia, to that one, right? These are the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Right? Look, I've set before you an open door that no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, again, we're calling a set of Jews associating them with Satan. It's just awful. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but are lying. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you, because you have kept my word of endurance. I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. Okay. I think you get the idea. The other two passages are in chapters 12, chapters 20, and chapter 20 of, and I want to make sure I'm looking at the right piece, because this is a great dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns. It's all very great stuff. But sorry, my throat is tickled. Here we go. I'm going to stay over here. So I hope this is, let's see, how does that look? Looks okay. All right. A war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. So the dragon was talked about up here at the beginning, right? Let's do this. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. So I've actually had an art student draw some of these depictions. It's just kind of fun to see how you can kind of work those things out. But we're talking about 7 and 10 have to do with perhaps the 7 hills of the countryside of Rome, or the city of Rome, or 10 would be most likely a reference to the number of particular emperors that have been involved in this, yada yada yada. Okay. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to deliver a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a scepter of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. It's really kind of interesting to me how many different times I hear people excuse me, refer to, Satan being cast out of heaven. That's an apocryphal writing that isn't actually found in any of the scriptures, but you can see where there's kind of a hint at it here and there, something like that in Isaiah 27. I think that in Revelation 12 is the closest we come to a canonical reference to that idea of, being thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. But, we do still need some sort of narrative to explain why that happened, and that's provided in this other apocryphal story, right, where the devil, not Satan, and it's certainly not being depicted as a dragon, right, is wanting his own following, or whatever the story is. And so God kicks him out, right, sends a bunch of angels with him. Great story, interesting stories. Not my cup of tea, but there you have it. Not a bedtime story I'd want to be reading to children. And then in chapter 20, so we have one more to look at. I appreciate that you all have hung in there with this. This is, once I realized I was getting close to an hour, I thought maybe I should just push through and do all of it and just get it all done. So I appreciate that you, those of you who wanted to stay, were able to stay this long. I appreciate that. So this is the last set of references to Satan. Let me just very quickly, sorry about that. I want to, What are the references? So it's, okay, chapter 20, verses 2 and 7. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. These are also really interesting things to try to depict. Like, I don't know if you're the kind of person who can depict things on the mental, screen in your head. I realize not everybody can do that. But try to picture it for yourself. What does this look like? A bottomless pit and a great chain. Like, what do these look like? He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan. Same language that we just heard. We just read in chapter 12, right? And bound him for 1,000 years and threw him into the pit and locked and sealed it over him so that he would deceive the nations no more until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be let out for a little while. All these, what do the numbers mean, the 1,000 years? And this is where people get into, millenarianism and the Great Tribulation, post and pre and all that trib. And I remember when I was in college, maybe starting to try to track with the different understandings of things, but I don't know, and that's not something I want to give space in my head to. Not interested in that. But this is where it all comes from. Like some of this language about 1,000 years and this and that and this will happen and this. Okay, this is a dream, folks. This is a dream. And the whole point of this dream is to demonize, to talk about the leader of the Roman Empire, so the world that they all lived in, as going down in great flames, right? For what's happening to the followers of the Christ, in particular in the region of Asia Minor. I mean, this is about political torture and execution. This is about being angry about that and feeling powerless to do anything about it. So they turn to this genre we call apocalypse, and it's one of the ways at hand to deal with it is to talk about your enemies getting theirs, right? You are powerless to address this in this lifetime. You believe in a righteous God who will make it all right at some point, and it's not happening in this lifetime, so it must be happening in the next, or there's going to be a big judgment day or some sort of war where they're going to come in and take out all of our enemies and establish things righteously, and start over, right? That's what's going on in this particular version of apocalypse. There is no destruction of the planet. There is no, there's an end of this era of suffering and of unjust leaders and people suffering at the hands of their leaders and all that. That is what it's talking about. And it's talking about politics. It's talking about the suffering of the people. So all of this language is metaphorical. It's symbolic. It's whatever, right? And these labels, devil, Satan, the dragon, all these things, they're kind of being used interchangeably, even though at certain points it's saying, well, there's a beast and then there's another one, and the second one takes on the power of the first one and all this kind of stuff, right? We're talking about different emperors, and so it's only slightly veiled references to Roman emperors and what's happening to people, okay? So picking up just to read the rest of what's going on here. And then I saw thrones, and those seated on them were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God. This is about, we are committed to this, and we're not giving up on this, and that means that we're not giving honor to the emperor. They had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its brand on their foreheads and their hands. They had not worshipped the beast or its image. This is literally what happens when you pay homage to the emperor. You bow down before an image of him. In the letter of Pliny to Trajan, it's very explicitly stated that Pliny decided to bring in statues of the emperor to see if the Christians would bow down to them. I mean, this is it's quite literally the same language that's being used here is also being used in this letter written about the same time. Okay. They had not worshipped the beast, the emperor, or its image, the statue of the emperor, right? They came to life and had not received its brand on their foreheads or theirs. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The souls of those who had been beheaded, right, came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. I don't even know how to do that, and I don't care, right? This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him 1,000 years. And, I get that some people want to figure that all out. I just don't. I've just got no time to work that out. No interest in that, Okay. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, you can go look that up in the Hebrew Bible, in order to gather them for battle. They are as numerous as the sands of the sea. They marched up over the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil, who had deceived them, so we're using this interchangeably, was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. I love when I was writing my second book, Permission Granted, I was living with a friend and kind of helping her with her take care of her kids. And she had an 8-year-old daughter at the time. And I remember talking to her about, did she ask me if there was such a thing as hell or what? She had cousins that were very conservative. And so she'd heard it somewhere. She said, it just doesn't make sense because you would burn up in a few hours. There's no way you're going to burn forever. That was an 8-year-old. I'm like, Okay. So that's it. Those are the references to Satan in the Newer Testament. That's it. All of them. And is this a character? Is this an embodied spiritual being who is out to get you? Is this, that isn't even really what's being said here. But the book of Revelation is the closest we get to that. And it is a book that is talking about humans in this way. It is talking about the city of Rome as a sex worker, and it's calling her a whore. The city is being called a female and a sex worker, is being judged and demonized using a label applied only to women in this context in a negative way. This is somebody who's angry about the way the people he knows and loves are being treated, and that they feel powerless to do anything about it. This isn't about an actual, embodied being called a devil or Satan or the beasts and all that, right? The number of the beast, you can check that out, right? The number of the beast. It's Nero, right? 616 or 666, depending on which manuscript you're looking at or which version of his name, the nominative or accusative. Accusative has an extra N at the end. So extra 50 points there for the number of the beast. Because the number comes from associating numbers with the letters of the alphabet. And so we add up the numbers associated with Caesar Nero or Caesar Neron and get 616 or 666. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's not meant to be handled predominantly the way it's been handled. So that is it. Oh my goodness. I just saw the name Neil. I was like, Neil deGrasse Tyson is here? I just wanted to say, yes, the beast is a human. I just wanted to show that's a great name. Are there any questions? I am just delighted that you all are still here. We're going on an hour and 40 minutes. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I'd love to, if there are any other questions. I didn't see any pop up that especially getting my attention here. And I'll give it a few seconds here for the difference in time for when I say it and then when you have a chance to respond. But let's see, are there any other things I need to say before we wrap up? Hell is not a place. Okay. I think that you all have had a good time chatting, and that makes me really happy. And let me make sure I got to the 5. Let's see. Yeah, I think we addressed all the questions. So all the thank you so much. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your banter. I love the fact that there's some people that just enjoy hanging out, seeing each other during this time. Next week is my colleague Lynn Huber is going to be joining us for a conversation with me. She's a queer New Testament scholar, and she actually Revelation is the thing she focuses on, which is kind of interesting. Didn't mean to do this the week before she came on, but that's all right, because it's more than just her work on Revelation. I think you will find her a really interesting person, and she is a bit of an introvert, and so it's not normally, I guess, her style, but she is excited to come hang out and have a conversation with me next week. So I will look forward to introducing her to you all. And once again, thank you. Thanks for being here. If you found this interesting, I would love it if you would give this video a like, or if you'd share it with a friend. If you haven't already, if you would subscribe to my channel, that helps other people out there discover this. Other people like you who are interested in the same stuff you are, find my work. So that's helpful for everybody. So I appreciate you all doing that. And so until next week, thanks for being here, and I will see you. Hope you have a good week. Thanks, folks.